If there's one question I get more than any other, it's from which brand, at which price point do you get the most watch for your money? Where is the quality to value relationship the highest? I've made my case in previous videos that the best value is somewhere around $1,500 to $3,000. That's where you get the absolute maximum of quality and features for the price. I've also been of the opinion for the last couple of years that Tudor have been the value leader, but they're not anymore. There's one brand that is the new value king. It's not an unknown brand. It's a brand that sells somewhere around 1.5 million watches a year. It's Longines. I'm going to run through the history of Longines, their strengths and weaknesses, and make my case for why Longines is the current best bang for your buck brand out there. This is a brand you don't care about, but you should. Let's dive in. Nobody talks about Longines. Some things are really predictable. I know for a fact that when I talk about how Tudor have dominated for the last 5 to 10 years, there will be someone in the comments that write that Tudor don't have anywhere near the volumes of Longines. Tudor, according to Morgan Stanley, sell around 250,000 watches, where Longines sell 1.5 million. But the fact is, Tudor have dominated in terms of voice positioning and just overall noise. I went to Adrian Barker's YouTube site and counted the number of times he has spoken about Longines and Tudor in 2025. 7 times Tudor gets a mention in his thumbnails or titles. Longines, once. Brit Pierce, 10 times for Tudor, twice for Longines. Teddy, 5 times for Tudor, twice for Longines. Myself, I'm not a whole lot better. But us YouTubers, we're not the center of the universe. So I went to A Blog to Watch, which is one of the world's biggest online websites covering watches that have had hands-on with 8 Tudor watches this year. Longines, 1. The same goes for monochrome watches, Fratello, Hodinkee. Even the New York Times has mentioned Tudor in their style section more times than Longines this year. Longines has volume something to the effect of 6 times greater than Tudor. They are priced relatively close, with Tudor being a little bit more expensive in general, and Longines consistently gets talked about less. It's a fact that Tudor has dominated in people's minds whether you like it or not. But as I'll get to, it really shouldn't be that way. Longines was founded in Saint-Imier in Switzerland in 1832 by Auguste Agassiz as a watchmaking workshop. Its history is marked by key innovations like the first serially produced chronograph in 1878, in 1911 the introduction of the first wrist chronographs, and its role in aviation with the development of the Lindbergh hour-angle watch for Charles Lindbergh in 1931. The company adopted the name Longines after its first factory was built in a location called Les Longines, the Long Meadows, and it is currently part of Swatch Group. Within the Swatch Group, Longines occupies the value space. Swatch Group has Blancpain and Breguet in the high end, Omega is the key premium brand for Swatch Group, Tissot is the low-cost entry offering, and Longines operate in the quality watch value space. And by quality watch value space, this is the space where you see a clear change in consumer. Above $2,000, you're making a significant investment into a watch, and you have customers starting to expect something that comes from a reputable source, and they have an expectation that the watch can last for a very long time. This is a watch that has to feel premium, and it might not be an explicit expectation, but the watch is no longer going to be available in a mall watch shop. Longines as a brand is in 80 territory, and the 80 might not crack open a bottle of Krug or Dom Perignon, but a half-decent Cremant or Prosecco isn't out of the question. Everybody wants a good watch, be it $20 for a Casio, $200 for a Chinese factory brand, or $10,000 for a Rolex. But at that $1,500 point and up, it turns into not just a cost, but also a significant investment decision. So people want to know they're really not wasting their money. Also, it's a segment where the volume comes from people that know nothing about watches. Those 255,000 Tudor customers and those 1.5 million Longines customers, the vast majority of them have no idea what KOSK is, but they will understand when an AD says that this watch has a special certification. They don't know that Longines has a long legacy, but they'll assume that the legacy equates with quality. They don't know that a quick adjustment mechanism is something that's important, but they'll think it's cool when it's presented to them. They will compare, but not just on looks of the watch, but also based on what the seller is telling them about the brands. They have high expectations, but they are impressionable as well. They're also not just going to pay for anything. The problem with JLC and Rolex and that space is that there is less of a critical look at the price. To a larger extent, customers, I think, are more likely to be comfortable with exorbitant prices at Rolex levels, but not at Longines levels. Also, because the watches are over those $1,500, you can't just slap something together. This customer is going to want something really, really good. The customer needs convincing on why they should pay more than some $800 watch, but they also question what they're missing out on by not buying some brand that they've heard of, like Breitling or Omega or IWC. This is a massively competitive space because of the nature of the customer and the competition in this space. If you're new to watches, if you're new to watch collecting, if you are new to my channel, then click the subscribe button below. On this channel, I talk about the watches that I love, the brands that I love, and just watches in general. I am unbiased, I'm honest, I'm in nobody's pocket, and I would love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks a ton. I've established now that Longines operates in an insanely competitive space. Probably the most competitive space of them all. But this also means that Longines are an entirely average and middle-of-the-road brand. They are aiming for volume, so being quirky or avant-garde or special is not in the cards at all. They're highly unlikely to do an Alan Silberstein or a Konstantin Shaken collab. They're not going to take chances with a watch called a Goofy Panda, and they're also not spending tons of cash on designing a skeletonized lapis lazuli dial. They are prioritizing having options that the truly mainstream, middle-of-the-road customer want. So their lineup is simple. The names are the Master line, the Conquest, the Spirit line, and the Heritage line. But it's probably better to look at them in a different way. The Conquest line is their sports watches and disc divers. These are the Longines versions of their Rolex Datejust, the Submariner, and the GMT lines. It's the competitor to the Black Bay 41, the Black Bay 1, and the Black Bay GMTs. It's sporty watches for people that have office jobs. It's the type of watches that are designed to work in most modern situations. In the office, at the barbecue, and on the wrist when doing the lower Yosemite Fall Trail. For that 1 mile, this watch is an excellent hiking watch, together with your Salomon boots, your Patagonia vest, and your Arc'teryx gloves. The Spirit line is the Tulia option and also the more premium option. It competes with watches like the IWC Mark 20 and the Pilot from IWC. We're still seeing a premium offering, and this isn't a tool watch in the way that some Citizens and Casios and Garmins are, but they have an ever so slightly more rugged and adventurous feel, but with a premium edge. In my mind, the Longines Conquest buyer is going to be wearing a puffer vest, where the Spirit buyer is more likely to own Dana boots and some seriously thick selvage denim. There's more of an enthusiast focus to the Spirit line compared to the Conquest. The Conquest is very much the every person's watch in the Longines lineup. The Master line is the almost obligatory dress watch line. It's the line that I inevitably ask the question to, who the hell buys these watches? And every time I ask, the answer comes back, more people than you would think. I'm super biased in the sense that they don't speak to me, but they are the middle-of-the-road classic dress watches. The Elegance line is the women's watches mostly, more jewels, a watch that reminds me of Cartier, a watch that reminds me of a Breguet, and so on. They are classic, they are middle-of-the-road, again, women's watches. Finally, they have the Heritage line, which I call the collector, enthusiast, and edgy customer watches. They are still relatively middle of the road, but on aesthetics, they are going to appeal to a more specific customer. The Magitech is not an everyman design. The Legend Diver likewise is a hit for them, but it does lean towards a more enthusiastic kind of customer. The same goes for the Ultrachron, which has a 1970s aesthetic with a 5 Hz movement that is not aimed at an uninformed customer. So basically, the lines are the basic middle-of-the-road sports watches, the slightly sportier middle-of-the-road tool watches with a premium feel, the middle-of-the-road dressy watches, the middle-of-the-road women's watches, and the middle-of-the-road but slightly more distinctive special pieces. All of Longines watches are wearable by your average modern person with a little bit of money. None of them are so wild that the watches stand out massively and call attention to themselves, but they look good and they're solid. On the vertical, Longines differentiates as well. Their differentiation is a little bit different from a brand like Rolex, where Rolex fundamentally sell the same watch, just with more gold. A Rolex Daytona comes in steel. Then you can upgrade to two-tone. From there you can get full gold on Oyster Flex, and from there you can get full gold and then platinum and then diamonds. But overall, it's the same watch. GMT, Submariner, Datejust, largely the same story. Longines don't do that, because they can't. Very few Longines customers are going to pay for a full gold Longines Conquest. So they differentiate in 2 ways: mechanics and complications. At the entry point, their watches are quartz. Above quartz, you have standard mechanical movements with decent specs. Above that, the movements get COSC certification, among other things. And finally, the movements get special complications like chronograph modules and 5 Hz frequencies, and the cases become ceramic or carbon or other special materials, titanium. There are also some design differences and features that differ as the price goes up, but in general, you see this consistency across the lines. Not all lines are going to be quartz. The Heritage line is going to be exclusively mechanical because they aim at the enthusiast a little bit more, and the enthusiast is not buying quartz at this price point. So let me walk you through what this looks like. You want a decent starter watch. You don't want to pay too much, and you don't care about the mechanics and all that stuff. That's the Conquest in quartz. Now, okay, you want something a little bit better. You want something that's a real mechanical watch. Well, that's the Conquest Mechanical. But the Mechanical Conquest is still not for someone that cares much about watches in that unhealthy enthusiast kind of way. And how do I know? It's not COSC certified. How do I get a COSC certified three-hander from Longines? I have to buy the Spirit. It's the same core movement as the one in the Conquest, but this one has achieved chronometer certification, and it almost entirely explains the difference in price. COSC usually adds about $250, $300 to the retail price. What if I want a good GMT? Well, that's the Hydro Conquest. What if I want a GMT that's chronometer accuracy and has more enthusiast street cred? That's the Spirit Zulu time. Longines don't waste COSC on customers that don't care about it, and that's women and generic male nice watch buyers. But the Spirit, that's also a little bit for nerds, so it gets COSC. And if you're a real nerd, then there's the Ultrachron, which is both COSC and 5 Hertz, and it's priced accordingly. Apart from that, there's a little bit of gold cap here and there and some lab-grown diamonds in some models, but Longines doesn't generally mess a lot around with expensive or weird materials. The number of titanium, carbon, or ceramic cases are extremely limited, and when they are in those enthusiast pieces. So why do I say that they are value leaders? Simple. Facts. Take the Longines Spirit versus the Tudor Ranger. These are two watches that are positioned almost exactly the same. The Spirit is $3,100 on a steel bracelet. The Ranger is $3,700 in the 36mm version. The Longines is COSC certified. The Tudor is COSC certified. The Longines has 72 hours of power reserve versus 70 hours of power reserve in the Tudor. They both have 100 meters of water resistance. Both have an excellent easy adjust mechanism. Both watches are impeccably finished, and in terms of build quality, I can't find anywhere where the Tudor is superior. Polish, clearances, tolerances, nothing. Honestly, the Spirit even looks more premium, but polished links do that, so I won't hold it against the Tudor. Next example, there's Formex. Formex are this small brand that you might not have heard of that give you a lot for your money. They're a company that are so good at what they do. When Gérard Perregaux need a ceramic case made, they call Formex's sister company Dexel to get it done. Formex has their model, the Essence, in 39mm, which is positioned somewhere around the Longines Conquest and the Spirit. It's $2,600 at the current exchange rate. It's COSC certified, just like the Spirit. It's $200 more than the non-COSC Conquest, but it only has 41 hours of power reserve. It's also excellently finished in every way. You change that to a 72-hour power reserve movement, and the Essence and Spirit are going to be incredibly close in price. And considering that there are very few stores where you can try a Formex, whereas Longines has dealers everywhere, the small premium is something a lot of people are going to care about. A mechanical Hydro Conquest is entirely competitive with a Seiko SLA 077. The finishings are highly comparable. The Longines still has a better bracelet. The 8L35 movement from Seiko is no slouch and comparable to the movement in the Conquest. And the Seiko is $300 more expensive depending on where in the world you live. I don't see a point in comparing to other Swatch Group brands because the results are a given, but it's fairly consistent. A pilot's watch from Fortis, which is not COSC, which has only 40 hours of power reserve, sits at $2,400. Add $300 on top for COSC, that's $2,700. From there, how do you explain the $400 difference to the Longines Spirit? 72 hours of power reserve, global service network, a more expensive dial, better case finishing, and a store you can walk into. Longines watches aren't always going to be in every single case the winner. There will be watches from other brands that on occasion outperform, but Longines are almost always in the running. And sure, you can get a Zin 556 that's cheaper, but it's an uncertified movement with less power reserve and a much more rudimentary finishing and a markedly inferior bracelet. You pretty consistently have to go to direct-to-consumer brand to find something that outcompetes. And yes, if you don't care about COSC, then you can say $300. But when you want all those features, Longines just competes. There's no watch that I've handled in the lineup where I've thought the price was off. It's always an experience of a watch where everything you expect to be there at the price is there, and the experience is just incredibly consistent. And that's why I'm totally comfortable with pronouncing them the current value leader, or the current value reference point. They're not perfect though. Being a value leader is not necessarily in itself a reason to buy a particular brand. Longines have their weaknesses, and I think they have a big one. I recently saw an interview with their CEO where he argued strongly that they were very happy to stay in their lane and the one that Swatch Group had assigned to them. But the fact is, the problem with the Longines lane is that their strength is their current weakness as well. 1.5 million or however many watches globally is a lot, but from a brand perspective, they are completely forgettable. There's a reason a blog to watch had hands-on with 8 watches from Tudor and only 1 from Longines. Longines as a brand are about as exciting as watching paint dry. I know they have Kate Winslet and Jennifer Lawrence and Henry Cavill as ambassadors. I know they are chosen because they are seen as down-to-earth and approachable, normal stars. They don't have the air of unapproachability that Roger Federer and Brad Pitt have. They're more down-to-earth. Their sports personalities are also more B-list, either in terms of sports or in terms of global recognition. All of this fits with what they can afford, but also the sort of story that they're trying to tell. But to me, apart from Longines have some good watches, I see nothing that awakens any kind of emotional appeal. It's just some good watches. And I think this is a risk at a minimum, because making some good watches is becoming more and more accessible. I spoke to a producer not long ago who, in confidentiality, made clear that parts they were supplying for certain cheaper brands were also being supplied to Longines. Being a value leader is a vulnerable place to be when it's just getting easier to replicate the quality levels in this price point. It doesn't surprise me that Tudor is just that bit more expensive and leans just that little bit more on stronger marketing. I think in part it's about being more than just good value. Right now, I don't think it's a direct problem. Longines has a challenge in China because of problems with China and not as such problems with their own brand. Longines has apparently also seen an uptick in demand in the Americas, which is also a positive. I think it's in part down to the fact that these uncertain times, people turn their backs on watch brands that have unreasonable price increases, and value brands like Longines are seeing an influx of value-orientated customers. But value is replicatable. So what's going to keep you top of mind in a world where there are more and more that can also make a good watch at a good price? That's my longer term question. Not that it's a problem right now. A Magitech, an Ultrachron, a Conquest, and a Spirit are pretty darn good watches that have great specs and are competitively priced. That's good for Longines and for us right now. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.